Next time on Endurance Hawaii on Discovery Kids on NBC.
A Decision 2004 special, Ryun versus Boyda, brought to you by 27 News and our media partners, KTWU 580 AM and the Topeka Capital Journal.
Welcome to the 2004 2nd Congressional District Debate. I'm Bob Beatty with KTWU and Washburn University.
And I'm Amy Leitz with KSNT 27 News. Our debate is between Congressman Jim Ryan and Democrat challenger Nancy Boyda. We hope the information you hear in the next 60 minutes will help you decide who to vote for on November 2nd.
The 2nd Congressional District is the second largest district land-wise in Kansas. The district runs north to the Kansas-Nebraska state line and south to Oklahoma. It expands west as far as Riley and Geary counties. To the east, it includes Kansans living on the west side of Lawrence and along the Kansas-Missouri state line.
Now that we know about the district they want to represent, let's get to know the candidates a little bit better. Jim Ryan's run for Congress began with a run of a different kind.
In 1996, the Olympic torch, I was helping carry the Olympic torch across Kansas, ended up in Wichita. At that point, Congressman T. Hart challenged me, saying that Senator Dole had decided to run for the presidency, leaving the 2nd District seat open. Representative Brownback had decided to run for the Senate. Jim, why don't you consider running?
Now, 8 years into his challenge, Ryan considers it an honor to serve the people of the 2nd District. But he hasn't done it alone. His family has played a large role. He and his wife, Ann, have 4 adult children who've been by their side every step of the way.
We would break up in twos. Ann and I would go out, or Drew and Catherine and Ned and Heather, and it was a great opportunity for Kansans to see not only the values that I represented, but we represented as a family, but to have a little piece of the family with the children, with all of us split up over the district.
And as his #1 constituent, I remind him that I'm very grateful that I have an honorable and a trustworthy and a loyal man to represent my concerns.
This is Congressman Ryan's 5th campaign, and he's not ready to give up his fight for Kansans.
I still feel as committed as I did when I first started. I still consider it a great privilege to serve and to help. Now that I have a little more experience, I know how to continue to carry those issues just a little bit faster before the House of Representatives, the People's House, and then to the various committees.
Jim Ryan, your incumbent Republican candidate for Kansas 2nd District. Nancy Boyda is a newcomer to the world of politics, but you'd never know it. From day one of her campaign, Boyda dove headfirst into the hands-on task involved in getting elected.
You're a determined woman. You clearly speak up for what you believe in.
That's the talk she got from her husband, the talk that started it all.
One morning at breakfast, my husband turned to me and said, if you're that concerned about things, why don't you get out and do something about it and run for Congress?
My name's Victor.
Victor, thanks for taking care of it. We certainly talked about it and prayed about it and said, let's go for it. And if we're doing it, if I'm doing it, I don't do things halfway. I said, we'll do this in order to win.
A big part of her decision came from being a mom. Together with her husband, Steve, they've raised 7 children. Now that they're grown, her concerns focus on making sure they'll be able to get jobs and keep them.
As a mother is concerned about literally the safety of her own children, jobs, health care, and clearly about educating our grandchildren. So those were the issues that were confronting our family, and I think there's some good common sense answers.
Boyda has worked most of her life in the pharmaceutical field. She assures Kansans she's prepared to tackle health care issues and anything else that comes her way.
We really do need somebody who's going to be out there fighting for what we need in the 2nd District of Kansas, and I'll be doing that.
Nancy Boyda, your Democratic candidate for Kansas 2nd District.
Now that you know a little bit more about who wants to represent the 2nd District, we want to welcome our candidates, Congressman Jim Ryan and Democrat challenger Nancy Boyda. Thank you both for participating in today's debate.
We will first hear from each candidate why they are running. Then the debate will begin with a panel of Topeka journalists asking questions. Each candidate will answer the question and have the opportunity to respond to what the other says.
Both have agreed to not ask the other questions. Amy and I will serve as the moderators, and will provide follow-up questions on each issue and keep the candidates focused on the questions.
Our panelists are Liz Montano, news director with AM 580 Radio, 27 News morning anchor and reporter Sarah Augusti, and Pete Gehring, reporter with the Topeka Capital Journal. Thank you all for joining us.
We flipped a coin and determined Miss Boyda will explain why she wants to represent the 2nd Congressional District first. Then at the end of the debate, Mr. Ryan will deliver the first closing remarks.
All right, let's begin with Miss Boyda. First of all, tell us why you would like to represent the 2nd District of Kansas.
Thank you. Let me tell you how the story started. We were sitting at breakfast one morning, my husband Steve and I, and he looked at me and he said, if you're that concerned, why don't you get out there and do something about it? Instead of just talking, get out there and work for change and run for Congress. And we have 7 kids between us. I have 2, he has 5. I certainly don't want to take any more credit than credit is due. And he just said, get out there, you're a determined woman, which I am, and you'll work hard, you'll do straight talk, and that's who we need in Congress. So we started the campaign last Labor Day and have been spending the last 14 months going up and down this district, talking and listening and listening and listening. And what I've heard over and over again, Bob and Amy, as you probably can imagine, people are very concerned about our jobs, and they don't understand why we're sending them overseas without fighting for them. Healthcare is just, it's a big problem for Steve and me and our kids and their families, and it's a major problem for our families and our businesses up and down the district. I've worked in the pharmaceutical industry over 20 years, and believe you me, I know what we need to do to bring the price of drugs down, and as concerned as you are about why Congress hasn't been doing something about that. Public schools are one of those things, again, that just, Steve said, get out there. I'm so concerned that we're not going to have good, strong public schools unless people stand up and fight for them. You don't come between Kansans and public schools, I'll tell you that much. And I'll be out there fighting to make sure that they're funded and we have appropriate legislation from the federal government. Clearly, keeping my own family safe is a priority. And I understand that if my family is safe, that means my country has to be safe.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Boyda. Your time is up. And Mr. Ryan, Congressman Ryan.
Amy, I want to thank you and Bob for moderating this debate. It's my pleasure to have served the last 8 years in the 2nd District, full of wonderful constituents. I've had a great opportunity to listen to them, town hall meetings, my frequent trips back to the district, and I've been able to help them in many areas. I've helped lower taxes. I've been able to work on increasing the child tax credit to $1,000 per child. I've also worked on the elimination of the marriage tax penalty and bringing to end the death tax, which shouldn't be an event which we can tax somebody one more time. I've also worked on some health care issues, which I believe are going to continue to lower the cost of health care, association health plans, health savings account, and tort reform. Those are big issues within the 2nd District and how we can help lower health care costs. I've also been able to help our military, bringing hundreds of millions of dollars into the 3 installations that are in the 2nd District, Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth, and Forbes Field. I believe our soldiers should have everything they need when they go into combat, and that while they're gone, their families should be well taken care of, having their health care needs taken care of, having their housing taken care of, and that as our soldiers are preparing to go, that they have the kind of readiness training that they need. So it's been my privilege to serve and do that, and I'm looking forward to discussing the issues. I only wish, though, that we could have brought in the Libertarian Dennis Hauber. I know he's running for office as well. It would have been nice to have all 3 of us here at the table together.
Okay, Mr. Ryan, thank you very much. And our first question now will come from our panelist, AM 580 Radio News Director Liz Montano, and will focus on the war in Iraq. Liz?
Thank you, Amy. And in fact, this first question is posed by a soldier who's stationed in Baghdad. We're now using the Army National Guard and Air Force Reserves as a ready source of both unit and individual deployments. The paradigm shift of the two called for by Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld involves every unit falling into a window of possible deployment every 5 to 6 years. This means most guardsmen and reservists could expect to deploy for a year or more, 3 to 4 times during a 20-year career. Do you favor this change? And what benefits and protections will you support to help the Guard and Reserves be able to retain soldiers?
Okay, did you understand the question?
Yes, I did.
Okay, Mr. Ryan, you are first on this question.
Thank you very much, Liz. Thank you for your question. we need more active duty, and that's why we have such a dependency upon the Reserve and Guard. Our troops now represent roughly 40%, or rather the Reserve and Guard represent roughly 40% of what it means to be active duty in the field. My very first year of my very first term, I began working on what I knew was a shortfall, and that is we didn't have enough active duty, meaning those that would be on the front line fighting for us. And so I have fought for that. We'll continue to. In fact, this year in the Defense Authorization Bill, I'm a part of the Armed Services Committee, was on the actual conference that included increases in active duty soldiers. We need to continue to raise those levels. Now, what I'm doing to help our reserve component is I have put together a bill which I've gotten out of the Armed Services Committee that recognizes that when the reserve component becomes active, usually they have a decrease in their pay. And so what I have put together is a bill that says when they leave and they have a decrease in the pay, they should not have their home put in jeopardy, so that there is a need for them to work with the financial services industry and ensure that they don't lose their home while they're away serving. It's passed out of the Armed Services Committee. I've got support from the Reserve Officers group. I've got the IRS supporting it too, because that bothers me a little bit, wondering why they're there, but I want to do everything I can because they are a very important, essential part of our troops fighting the war on terror.
Ms. Boyda?
Well, Jim, I agree with you on that. We need an absolutely strong voluntary force. I've had the chance to have command briefings at our military bases here in the district, and what I hear overwhelmingly is we want a strong volunteer force. So I agree with you 100% on that, and that we need additional troops. What concerns me is the benefit of having been campaigning and listening now for 14 months. What concerns me is some of the recruiters that I've spoken to at the county fairs and different events around have said that they're having more and more trouble recruiting for our volunteer services, and that concerns me as well. What I hear is that it's actually sometimes grandma and grandpa that are saying don't go, and that concerns me a great deal. We've cut $1.6 billion out of our veterans' benefits, and I understand what that's doing, and we've done it at the same time that new veterans are coming home every day, and it's creating that perfect storm within the VA system, and I think overall affecting what's going on with recruitment. I think our volunteer force is the very foundation of our homeland and national security, and I'll be fighting to make sure that we keep our promises to our veterans, and we do have everything. We give our current soldiers everything that they need to be safe and secure while they're out there fighting for us, and to be successful so that they can come home.
Bob, did you have a follow-up to
Yeah,
this?
Liz's question came from a soldier in Iraq, so let's talk about that a bit. Congressman Ryun and Ms. Boyda, I'll start with you. Did you support the invasion of Iraq?
I supported it as a last resort. I felt that the diplomatic channels had been exhausted. The UN had issued a number of resolutions that were rejected by Saddam Hussein, and that the next step was to move in as we did in the invasion. You know, part of that is simply because we have an unconventional enemy. You know, they attacked us. They attacked us on 9/11. And I think it was important for us to have an appropriate response. We began, first of all, by going into Afghanistan with the Taliban, and then moving on into Iraq. And I think it was the right thing to do, and I support what the President did.
Ms. Boyda?
Let me just tell you my personal story. Again, I was on September 11th of 2001, never even thinking about running for office. I was a wife and mother, and I was working. What happened on September 11th clearly changed my life, as I think it did most Americans. I don't think it's been the same afterwards. And my entire thinking was, how do I protect and keep my family safe? And I think going into Afghanistan was clearly the right thing to do. And going in and routing out Osama bin Laden, who had al-Qaeda and flown those planes into the Twin Towers, we needed to be out there doing everything that we could. When it became clear that we were talking about going into Iraq, I had questions. I think as many Americans and as many Kansans did, about was it at that time the proper response to that tragedy that had affected us all on 9/11. And I did speak out about that. Let me also give some credit here where credit is due again. My husband Steve, who is a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine, but was a Marine for 11 years during Vietnam, a Marine reservist. came to me on the night that the war started and said, I don't think we should speak out again. And I agreed with him 100%. Once President Bush committed our troops and committed our country, we have one option for the safety of our country and clearly for what's going on with the security in the Middle East, and that is to be successful in Iraq. And Jim, for you to have ever insinuated that I wouldn't do everything to protect my own family and protect our country would just be very, very wrong. And I would ask at some point for you to recognize that and perhaps even apologize.
I need to respond to that if I may. I don't question your patriotism, but I do question, protesting when our troops are dying on the ground in Afghanistan, organizing and putting together the war protest and actually having a group called Council for a Livable World that you not only received an endorsement from, but you raised money through, showing your support for reduction of money for our troops, some of the things that our military would actually need. So I guess I would question, why you were involved in those and why you were protesting and organizing while our troops were actually dying on the ground.
Well, again, let me make it real clear, and I'm glad that we have the chance for a face-to-face discussion, because I think it will be good for everyone. But yes, I did exercise my democratic right to speak out. If you want to look at one of the articles discussing the organized protest that we did organize, they said specifically, and this again before I was ever thinking of running for Congress, they said we had some guidelines that said we don't want to do anything to trash President Bush. Those were the specific words. We wanted signs that clearly supported our troops. We made sure that there was no profanity. We said specifically anything about talking about any severe rhetoric against our president was absolutely inappropriate. And we tried to set up guidelines and did that. We had very, very peaceful, if you want to call them protests, call them protests. They were very peaceful. I believe again that was my right to speak up. And again, and I would say again that even though at that time when the war started, and it was Steve who said, we have the right, but we're going to choose to not speak out anymore.
In this case, we'll give you the last word if you'd like.
I would just ask people to go to that website, Council for a More Livable World, look at the timeline, because she was actually protesting and organizing while our troops were dying. It's not quite as simple as she presents. And I agree she has the right to do that. That's why they are there, fighting so we have the freedoms that we so much appreciate in this country.
Okay, thank you both of you. We'll now turn our attention to health care, another hot topic, with a question now from 27 News morning anchor Sarah Auguste. Sarah?
Thank you. A recent report released by the Kansas Association of Community Action states 64,000 children in Kansas do not have health insurance, and close to 250,000 people in families with at least one working adult do not have health insurance either. Ms. Boyda, you say you'll fight both to increase Medicaid eligibility and to provide targeted tax incentives to small employers. Mr. Ryun, you supported the Jobs and Growth Tax Act of 2003 that provided a $350 billion tax cut package. But business owners across Kansas still complain they cannot afford to cover health insurance for their employees and their families. What will you do to get Kansans and their families insured despite the overwhelming costs for small businesses employing them?
Thank you, Sarah. And Ms. Boyda, this is your start.
Well, as I've been up and down the district, there are two things that I hear about over and over again, jobs and health care, and you just can't tease those two apart. Many, many days it's health care that I hear about first. Again, having been out there campaigning and listening for 14 months, the conversation's changed. Our families and our seniors have been hurting badly. At the beginning of the year, the conversation changed when our businesses started really almost screaming about how difficult it is to have health insurance. These are people who want to provide health insurance for the people who are working for them, and it's getting almost impossible to do that. Let me tell you the first thing that I'm going to do. Having been in the pharmaceutical industry, the fastest rising part of the healthcare, Amy, Bob, Jim, are drug prices. And yet Congress has failed to make any meaningful change at all to bring down the price of drugs, and then turned around and said we can't even go to Canada, blocked every way to provide some access to affordable prescription drugs. When I'm in Congress, I will be out there saying time out to the pharmaceutical companies. You say you need money for research and development, or you spend as much on advertising as you do on research and development. Something's very much out of balance. I want there to be money for research and development, and I want the pharmaceutical companies to make a fair profit and a good profit, but something's very out of balance. When Congress said we're not going to even allow the federal government, which is the biggest purchaser of drugs, to not negotiate for the best price, something's very, very wrong at that point. We need to make sure that the biggest purchaser, Medicare and Medicaid, can in fact buy in bulk and get the best price for that drugs, or for those drugs. And I'll be fighting as a #1 priority. It will affect everything in total.
Okay, Congressman Ryan.
I appreciate the question because it is a very large issue in the 2nd District. I see our small businesses and, of course, individuals, they've seen the price of health insurance continue to rise lots and lots of years, 10 to 30%, so that you have the culmination of a real serious problem. I've offered 3 solutions. One, of course, is association health plans, small businesses pooling their employees and then negotiating lower prices. One is health savings account, which just became available this year. It is a tax-free account you can draw your medical expenses out of, and tort reform as well. I believe that we need to empower the individual, not the government. Now, there's a big difference here, and I think the election this time around is about choices. My opponent would like to empower the government, and she would like to see the federal government negotiating Medicare and Medicaid prices. Well, I know that what happens is you have within the VA that selected group that they're able to negotiate for veterans. It's a very small segment of society. But when you move down this particular avenue, you're really empowering the government because they only select plans, not necessarily having choice. I believe you should have choice in your health insurance, not just selective things. In fact, I've had a number of veterans that have come to me under the Veterans Program where the government negotiates everything, and they will say, I don't have choice anymore. I've lost my choice as a result of the government negotiating for me. I believe we need to go through a market-based program where we can see lower prices as a result of this, and at the same time give our people interested in health care choices. Now, one more thing as far as reimportation, I'm actually for reimportation. If you could guarantee the safety and soundness of it, then the FDA cannot do that. There are too many instances of things coming across the border that are not what they've actually are expected to be. If you could do that, I think reimportation would be great.
And some of those ads for healthcare products, you have to take the children out of the room when they come on. But did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yes, I certainly would like to. We see things differently. I think we need to allow businesses to come together and buy health insurance collectively and get them better prices. But the health association, the association health plans that Jim has been supporting is something that even Sandy Prager, who is our insurance commissioner here in Kansas, Republican insurance commissioner, back on September 3rd of 2003 wrote a 2-page letter to Bill Frist and to Tom Daschle, and used these were her exact words. Association health plans have an extremely adverse implication for our consumers. The bill ignores the root of the cause of the current prices, skyrocketing health care and spending, and would, according to the Congressional Budget Office, actually increase the cost of insurance for many small businesses. So the actual association health plans that you're recommending, Sandy Prager has spent 2 pages, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, September 3rd, 2003, saying this is probably the worst thing that we can probably do. So I would say that. Let me also say that I have talked to so many veterans up and down this district that have said, thank God, and they mean that literally, that they can get their prescriptions for $7 a piece. I hear over and over, they don't know what they would do if they didn't, because the Veterans Administration can, in fact, negotiate for better prices, and it's been a huge blessing for our veterans.
I'll just respond to the association health plans by simply saying, as I've gone through the district, as I've worked with small businesses, this is something they're very interested in. They see the value of being able to pool your employees with other small businesses and therefore serve as, if you will, a larger business or maybe even a corporation, negotiate lower prices. They see great value here. There's nothing that's going to get us a quick fix on this. It's going to be an incremental process. We got there very slowly. We need to work our way back with good legislation. I believe this is a part of that.
And can I just say, too, I certainly want to work together with the small businessmen. I just want to make sure that what they're getting And Sandy Prager again has said what they're getting is not going to be what they expect. I think we need straight talk out of Washington, D.C., so that when we do something in Congress, we don't wake up 5 years later and say we've made a bigger mess of it than when it was begun.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic concerning the No Child Left Behind Act. Pete Gehring with the Topeka Capital Journal has our next question regarding this issue of education. Pete?
Amy, thank you. Both candidates have expressed concerns about the No Child Left Behind Act. Mr. Ryun voted against it in 2001, and Ms. Boyda says she would support letting states opt out of the act. If indeed the act is flawed, what would be a better education plan, and would that plan include vouchers to allow students to attend private schools?
Okay, excuse me, Mr. Congressman Ryun, you begin first.
Well, let me say, first of all, this is a piece of legislation that, as I worked with school administrators and school officials and teachers and addressed this before the actual vote, their concern was that, you know, they felt that more power would migrate to Washington, and that's been my concern. I have always felt local control was a much better way of handling education, where parents, local board of educations, teachers, everyone have more opportunity for input here. And so as I listened to their concerns and the vote actually came up, I was one of the few Republicans that said, you know, Kansas is doing well. You know, let's not reverse this process. Let's do what we can to encourage local education, and therefore I voted against that. But let me address a part of that that I know Pete actually asked, that is funding. Now, funding is an issue that has been raised through this program since 1996. Since I've been in Congress, I've seen funding come back for education that's increased by over 140%. Since No Child Left Behind, it's increased by 40%. And actually, one part of that affecting funding is what we call special education. You know, that pulls money out of the general education funds, and I've actually helped increase that by 250%. It's not a problem that's going away easily, but as I've talked to different administrators, they've said, we can't really opt out now, and they actually can't because they've already gone into the program. They need that federal aid. But let me point to one other thing, and that is the federal aid is only about 7% of what is actually needed for education on the state level. It really is a state funding formula. They need to fix it on the state side. I will continue to do what I can to ensure that they have enough dollars for education, and that our children are well educated and they have all the resources necessary upon graduation.
Ms. Boyda?
Well, let me just say, like Jim on the federal involvement in our public education, my main theme there is just do no harm. And up and down the district, I have heard that while there have been some good things that have come out of No Child Left Behind, on the whole, it's done more harm than good. And I believe that we ought to be able to let our states opt out of it. If the federal government can't fund it, Kansas certainly can't print money, certainly can't, isn't out there running a deficit. So we need to let the states opt out of it. When it comes to funding, I think there was just a very much of a disconnect again between where Jim Ryun, excuse me, for Mr. Ryun, you are, you've been coming from. Let me read a press release that your office put out February 12th. This was from your office on February 12th of 2004. It's my hope that this report will put an end to the complaints by those who say Kansas does not have adequate federal education funding. These statements are hard to believe when Kansas has accumulated over $16 million in unused education funding in just the past 2 years. I encourage our state elected officials to make wise use of already appropriated federal funds. Clearly, this caused an outrage among our state education department and our teachers. I understand that we are not beginning to fund, even though with the increase, we are not beginning to fund the programs that the federal government has mandated to our schools. And it is, and I understand, that it is undermining the very foundation of many of our public schools. And so many of them feel like they're in a situation where they just can't win. And they also want to know that somebody in Washington will be speaking up and doing and working hard. No Child Left Behind is up for review in 2006. It needs to be reviewed this time, not like the last time, this time with the input of all the educators. Last time, that No Child, when it was originally proposed, there was no input from educators. We need to have the input of our educators. And then what I'll be saying is whatever the federal government mandates, you either fund it or you let the states opt out of it. But Kansas schools are incredibly strong up and down this district, and they're willing to fight for them.
certainly educators, I'm sorry.
Would you like to respond, or
Yes,
Amy has
yes,
a follow-up
I
as well?
would, and then Amy, you're welcome to ask your follow-up. The letter that was referred to by my opponent was prompted because the National Education Association, the NEA, kept saying that there was no funding really going back to the states. We went back and looked up research indicating that there was $16 million for Kansas. Actually, in Ohio, it was over $100 million. Just simply emphasizing that there were fundings coming back. That was overplaying their hand, I think. That's not to say that the funding formula is complete, but it's just to say that there are federal dollars that are coming back. And I'm pleased that I've been able to help get some of those monies back here.
Let's go to Amy's follow-up, and you can
I think both of you have made comments that individuals, educators, students, parents would all be interested in hearing, particularly in the Topeka 501 district right now. They are dealing with hundreds of children walking to school every day, programs being cut left and right, teachers having to meet the demands of the No Child Left Behind Act without the supplies that they need. If you could speak to them, they seem to be a group that's pretty vocal themselves right now. If you could speak to them and tell them what you will do to get these Kansas kids the education they deserve, the teachers, the pay they deserve, and the school districts the funding. That's what they want to hear. Ms. Boyda.
I feel their pain, literally. I am just so concerned. We need to make sure that those funds are getting to the state. Right now, each school district is figuring out, local control with No Child Left Behind right now means each school district gets to choose how they're going to cut, which programs they're going to cut back. Some have gone to higher class sizes. They've cut back busing here. Some have cut back on science. Some have cut back on the arts and PE and sports. Each local control means right now that each school district gets to figure out which of these very, very precious programs are going to have to be cut. That's what I think people understand, that I believe in our public schools, and we'll be out there making sure that we have funds. Jim and I also very much differ on private school vouchers. Jim's voted 7 times for private school vouchers that would take federal funds and allow them to be used in private schools. I would never do that. It will drain more and more of the desperately needed money that we need for our public schools into private schools, and I disagree with that.
I believe in public education. I graduated from Wichita East High School, graduated from the University of Kansas. Our children were homeschooled for a period of time, but they graduated from Lawrence High School and then with honors from the University of Kansas. So I very much believe in the public school system. Now, what I have done and will continue to do is to look for things that will help Kansas education. Pay is certainly one of those things that's very significant. I think our teachers are underpaid tremendously. We'll continue to look for those federal dollars and how we can get more back here. I have voted on and helped pass out of the House of Representatives, what we call dollars to the classroom, meaning that 95% of every dollar that goes to Washington, 95% of it must come back to the state, so that we're providing even greater funding for the state. I believe in flexibility. I want to do what I can to create even more local control. You know, my concern about this particular program has been from the very beginning that in a sense it's very punitive towards teachers. It really doesn't take into consideration if the child doesn't wish to participate in the classroom or the parents aren't encouraging them. You know, it's hard to get that child to move forward. So I felt that, you know, teachers needed to have encouragement. And as I've met with school administrators throughout the district and my frequent trips back here with teachers, they have said that as well. And I will continue to look for ways to increase funding, doing what I can. I don't believe vouchers, where you should have vouchers going to out of the public school money, should travel somewhere else. The votes that were being referred to, the Democrat mayor in the District of Columbia, which the House of Representatives, actually Congress has, like a state would over that city control, asked for vouchers because he said the school system is failing. So we gave him vouchers, and I'm pleased that we're able to help him in this particular area.
Okay, we need to...
Just
quickly.
That was one of the 7 votes, the DC vote. It was one of 7 of them. And let me also say that 95% money back to the classroom was actually a non-binding resolution that I believe passed unanimously. I think everyone, we would all in this studio agree that 95% of the money should come back to the classroom. That was a non-binding resolution. I believe we need straight talk. That didn't really make any difference overall. I think it was a nice resolution, but the overall effect was not anything that was ever binding on anyone.
Okay, I think we need to move on at this point, and our next question focuses on one of our state's largest industry, agriculture, and Liz Montano joins us with that question. Liz?
Thanks again, Amy. The current subsidy structure of the U.S. farm program is being challenged in the World Trade Organization. It's likely the next member of Congress from this district will be a part of the process to design a new farm bill. What would you do to change the current support levels of agricultures, if anything at all?
Okay, Ms. Boyda.
Well, maintaining small businesses up and down this district is one of my priorities, and that means our family farms. I met with farmers right from the beginning and said, are we ready? Is it too late? Can we save the family farm, or is it just too late? Well, I got a very resounding no. The family farm in the 2nd district is alive and well. They're struggling. Maybe they're not alive and well. They're struggling badly. And I've gotten the support of Republicans and Democrats alike saying we need help in Congress to make sure that we stay strong. I will say, at first I went and met with a lot of farmers and said, you know, I really want to make sure I understand farm policy, and they told me to very nicely, no one understands farm policy. It's very, very complicated. But what I can tell you is that the benefits that are going to the big corporate farms are actually outweighing the benefits to our small farms, and eventually these farms are losing their ability to make a profit and compete, and we're losing our small farms up and down the district. They want to know that there's going to be somebody in Congress who's going to be fighting for them. Free trade agreements have actually done a great deal to hurt family farms, and we need to be out there working to make sure that trade agreements are good for our farmers. Right now I hear over and over again, maybe this is getting too technical, but the tech fees for soybeans that have to be paid by our farmers, the people down in South America don't have to pay those. We're trying to compete for just soybeans. We're headed towards actually a net import of soybeans, and I think within the next 5 to 10 years, if we don't make good-sized changes in our farm policy, we're going to see our farms struggle even worse and maybe lose the family farmer all around. And I, for one, and they know it, I, for one, will stand up and say, not while I'm in Congress, if I have anything to do with it.
Congressman. And I have done that. I've stood up for small farmers as I've worked throughout the 2nd District. I've spent a lot of time with them. I'm the only candidate that's endorsed by the Farm Bureau, and I've worked on making sure that I address issues that are of deep concern to them, giving them flexibility with the Farm Bill that was written. For example, one thing that we really didn't have in that particular bill was how are you going to deal with drought? That's why we need to go back and address that. I will continue to work on making sure that they have a lot at free trade. Free trade is a very important part. We obviously disagree on that. Trade is an essential part of what every small farm needs. As we continue to see the growth of that, it's good for farmers. I will continue to work on bringing into the death tax. That affects small farms and small businesses. I don't believe that the event of death should be another reason for the federal government to tax someone. That has put a lot of our small farms out of business because they've had to go and sell what they have to be able to pay that death tax. So I will continue to work on their behalf and do what I can to assist them.
I'm going to be authoritarian and ask if we could go to the next panelist question.
I think that's very, very much.
Don't glare at me too much.
Very much allowed at this point. Well, we turn our attention now to our country's dependence on oil with another question from Sarah Auguste.
Thanks again, Amy. Kansans currently pay almost $2 for a gallon of gas. If it's true Americans must depend less on foreign sources of crude oil, what do you see as our state's role in the future of ethanol production and availability as an environmentally friendly alternative source of energy?
Congressman, you're first on this one.
Thank you very much. I have actually worked on and helped pass a comprehensive energy bill that addresses some of these issues. Ethanol, for example, by the year 2012, they're expected to have 5 billion gallons of ethanol. It also means by the year 2014 that we would eventually phase out MTBE, something that's not good for our environment. In this process, too, there's provision for renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal, geomass. In fact, there are financial incentives to help them rise to an even higher level. I believe in developing alternative fuels, but I also know that as an energy-hungry country, You know, we have a dependency upon oil right now, and so we need to move forward with exploration. ANWR is, of course, one of the provisions within the Comprehensive Energy Bill that has been passed out of the House, but is stuck in the Senate at this point, primarily because of Senator Daschle's not willing. He wants to obstruct this because of whatever concerns, I'm not real sure. But ANWR is one of those particular areas that will help reduce some of our foreign dependency upon oil. I should say this for the listeners. You know, I remember I grew up when you had that time when you had to sit in the gas line and get, what, half a tank of gas. I don't know who, I can't remember who checked me. I don't know whether you all had your gas checked as to when you had the half a tank. But my point is we have an even greater dependency on foreign oil now. We have a very energy-hungry country. We need to have a very broad approach to it where we're dealing with renewables, with exploration, at the same time conservation, so that we can have a multi-pronged approach. And I support that and will continue to do that.
Ms. Boyda.
Again, I come back to my children and say, what on earth are we going to be doing? What's the foreign oil dependency that we're going to be having 15, 20 years from now? And it's a huge concern to me. I remember the gas lines in 1974 very well. It's been 30 years since we had an energy crisis here. And yet, since 1996, efficiency standards have, or fuel efficiency, not the standards, have come down, down, down. We peaked fuel efficiency in 1996, and it's come down since then. I am extremely excited about pursuing the opportunities with ethanol. It'll be good for Kansas, it'll be good for our country. I'm very, very excited about what the possibilities for wind energy here in the state of Kansas. I would love to see us take a very aggressive stand, manufacture the turbines here. It's an economic boom for Kansas. I want to make sure that they are placed in areas where we don't have environmentally fragile areas, but we got a great deal of Kansas out there. I've ridden my bike across the state 9 times. People say it's flat, and I go, you try to bike in that wind. It's worse than the mountains. So we have this wonderful resource called wind, and we need to put it to use. Again, we have to have a strong energy policy, and that does mean conservation, renewable fuels, and oil and gas exploration as well. And I'll be working in Congress to make sure that that balance is there so that my children and your children, again, will have a stable energy future, and we won't be reliant on foreign oil.
Did you have a follow-up?
No.
Anything else, Kimmy?
You can go to the questions.
Okay, next question is from Pete Gehring from the Topeka Capital Journal, and it raises the issue of gun control. Pete?
Both of you have expressed vigorous support for the Second Amendment. Does that support include a person's right to own assault weapons? And would you vote to continue the recently expired ban on those weapons?
All right, thank you, Pete. Ms. Boyda, you're first.
Well, I do support gun rights. I think law-abiding citizens should have the right to bear arms, and I would be out there making sure that we do that. As a woman and a Democrat, sometimes people assume that I want their guns. So in parades and different things where I just have a chance to meet a lot of people, I'll come up on a group of guys sometimes and say, I'm a woman and I'm a Democrat and I don't want your gun, and they'll laugh. We've been out doing clay shooting in a beautiful weekend last Saturday over at Ravenwood, and we had a wonderful time. I believe that with proper background and training, that concealed carry is appropriate. Law-abiding citizens should be able to have the right to bear an arm. However, I think I would have voted for the extension of the assault weapon ban. It is not a moderate view that I think best represents the 2nd District of Kansas. And again, I keep saying I'm a moderate common sense woman, and I think my gun views represent and reflect the moderate views of the district. I don't think people want to know that you can carry an assault weapon up and down the district, and that's one of the clear areas where Jim and I would differ.
Congressman Ryun?
Pete, thanks for your question. I support Second Amendment rights. I have the endorsement of the National Rifle Association because they recognize that I have continued to fight for that particular right. We'll do that in Congress, have represented them well. I do not support the extension of the assault weapon ban, and for this reason. It doesn't ban assault weapons. They were already banned. And that's one of the reasons that when it came up for a vote, there really wasn't that support for that particular measure to go forward. What it really addressed were gun barrels and stocks and a few things like that. I also support concealed carry, simply because I think what you do with this particular measure is you put the question in the mind of the person wanting to do harm. Do you actually have a concealed weapon? and it causes them to pause. It doesn't mean it's going to become a Dodge City experience. I don't believe that at all, but rather what it does is it gives the innocent the opportunity to at least put the question in the mind of those that might try to harm them.
So both of you are unhappy with the Kansas governor who vetoed concealed carry. Did you let her know?
She certainly knows my opinion. I agree with my party on many things, and I disagree with him on some. I agree with Governor Sebelius on some and disagree with her on others. So.
I actually haven't spent that much time with her to really express it, but I am a very strong advocate of that.
Okay, and I believe we have time for maybe one more question if we can keep our answers brief, and then we can do our wrap-up as well before we end our time here. Our next question is about the future of Social Security, and it comes from Liz Montano. Liz?
Thanks again, Amy. Experts tell us that by the year 2018, Social Security could be in real trouble, and that by the time the current 40-year-old retires, there could be no Social Security benefits for them. How would you propose to ensure Social Security benefits for future recipients?
Congressman Ryan, you begin this.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz, for your question. Let me simply say that it's election time, and during this process, often there are scare tactics put in place that suggest that, Republicans, myself included, are going to take away Social Security. I am the one who has continued to fight for its future. I recognize there's a problem. You do not have as many people contributing to it as you once did. The baby boomers are coming online very soon. So, avoiding a difficult situation now without looking to the future isn't the right thing for our seniors. I believe the benefits should stay there, but we genuinely have to look at some sort of reform. I have not settled on a reform at this point in time. I've recently written some letters back to constituents who had some questions about privatization or personalization of an account. I have not settled on a particular how we're going to resolve this, because it's a very complicated issue, and I will continue to work for making sure the benefits are there. The same as Social Security is true of Medicare. We have even greater obligations there, and just simply avoiding bringing an answer to this doesn't provide for the future of our seniors and giving them the kind of security that they expect.
Thank you. Ms. Boyda?
Yes, it does. I have the constituent, or the franked letter back to seniors dated August 4th of 2004. And let me just read part of that. Here is my plan for reforming the system. 1, 2, 3. Let me go to the third one. Give younger generations a program that will give them increased personal control over their Social Security. H.R. 3177, the Social Security Savings Act of 2003, would create personal Social Security accounts that would protect your retirement benefits from being spent by the government. These are privatization. And I would say, again, I think there's a very clear distinction between Jim and me. And he has actually been out calling for the privatization of Social Security. And I want seniors to know that I do not want to privatize Social Security. I want to protect it. Again, it will come back with, I think, what has become some Washington doublespeak, but no matter how you cut it, it does come back to privatizing Social Security, and I'm glad that seniors have a chance to know that we do differ on these things.
And I'm very pleased. I have a chance to respond to that. My position, and it was misrepresented in that letter by my opponent, is simply that we have a problem. It's not going away, and we need to address it in a timely manner. Privatization is a possibility, but that's not one I've settled on completely. There are lots of alternatives out there, but we need to approach this soon before it becomes an even larger issue. And I will continue to work to make sure our seniors have the benefits and that Social Security is there for the years to come so that future generations have it as well.
Ms. Boyda, anything else?
The letter speaks for itself. I don't think I've misrepresented anything. The letter speaks for itself.
Okay, Professor Beatty, time for a follow-up?
Well, we have time for a few quick questions.
We can change the topic just quickly.
Yeah, these are in quick answers, hopefully, and we'll let you know if they're not so quick. Should Kansas change its electoral college system like Colorado is considering to a proportional system? Start with Congressman.
I tend to stick with the time-honored tradition that we currently have.
I'd like my vote to count.
So you'd be open to switching?
I would be open to looking at what the Electoral College and making some changes to it. Open to looking at it. I don't have a defined position on it, but I certainly would love to have my vote count. Whether I'm voting Republican or Democrat right now, we don't have a big say in the presidential politics. It would be fun if we got as much attention as was going on in Ohio right now.
A lot of money, too.
I think your vote does count. Last time I looked, your vote does count. It's really a matter of how you view this particular process, and what's happening in Colorado is bringing a lot of confusion into the election process. If you lose, you want to see the electoral process change. If you win, you don't really care. I prefer to stay with what has proven through time to actually work.
Okay. Let me ask if Iowa puts congressional redistricting in the hands of a bipartisan type group, limiting the extreme gerrymandering that's been going on throughout the nation. Obviously not in this district, because we have a nice race here, but should Kansas consider doing something like Iowa does? We'll start with you.
Let me just say, one of the concerns and one of the reasons that I'm running is because I think we have to have a strong two-party system. Right now, there are, depending on how you count it, between 35 and 40 contested races out of 435. This race, for all intents and purposes, hasn't been hotly contested for 8 years. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think it's hard. Let me just say that it's hard to stand up and to question a four-term incumbent, and especially one who's an Olympic hero. But it still needs to be done. I think when we have 400 seats that go virtually unopposed, I think our democracy is not stronger for it.
Congressman Ryan?
Well, you know, the whole system is one that through the years has worked well. There are questions. I've actually talked to the Iowa representative to see what their thoughts are. You know, they have a mixed feeling about it. They don't feel that it really rests in the hands of the elected officials, and as a result, it isn't a terribly fair process. And, you know, so I'm not in support of changing it. I'd like to see it continue to move forward. I'm happy to have represented the district for the last 8 years. I have very broad support. Whereas my opponent, for example, is kind of wealthy. She's put $265,000 of her own money into this. That's what I don't particularly care for. One of the reasons that I didn't vote for campaign finance reform, because it allows the very wealthy to have an opportunity to pretty much buy their vote.
Okay, this is a tough one to wrap up in a quick way.
Whoa, do I get to say something to that? Hold on, hold on.
Quickly.
We've raised well over one
Very
point
quickly.
something million dollars, and we were able to make a financial investment. I will tell you, some of that came from money that I got when I scooped Baskin-Robbins ice cream when I was 13 years old. I have been saving for so long, and this was so important to me that that's where that money came from too. I am incredibly thrifty. Our democracy is that important that I've said yes, I'll dip into our personal savings.
Okay.
265,000 is still 265.
Okay, and time is still time, and we need to wrap up our time here on this hour-long conversation we've had with you two individuals, and we'd like to give you, Congressman Ryan, time for your final comments at this point.
Well, first of all, let me thank you as well as our panelists for having had this debate today. I think it's been very healthy. I think the listeners can easily see there's a tremendous difference between my opponent and myself. I have represented the district with the values of the 2nd District. I have lived here for over 20 years. My opponent has just recently moved into the district. I have raised my children here. All of our children have grown up with my wife, Ann, for 35 years. We have really enjoyed living here. We'll continue to do that, and I have spent lots of hours, lots of time coming back to the 2nd District. I come back most weekends, covered 100,000 miles, working throughout the district, listening in civic hall meetings, having donuts and coffee or whatever was offered, listening to their concerns, 60 schools, countless meetings in my office, meetings on the street. I'm available whenever necessary to listen to their concerns and carry those back to the People's House, the House of Representatives, and I would ask again for their vote.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Boyda?
Well, I too really appreciate the chance to have a face-to-face and good discussion like this. I think the voters will benefit from it. Let me tell you what I think that this race is about. I think there are very, very clear choices, and Jim and I see things differently. I understand that it's wrong to send our jobs overseas. I get it. And I will be fighting to say we need to keep those jobs in the United States, specifically the 2nd District of Kansas. I understand that we need to stand up to drug companies and fight to lower prices. And I'll be doing that. I promise I'll put a smile on my face when I go to Washington, but you can rest assured that I will speak up and make sure that our voice is heard. I understand that our schools are struggling, and they need help, and they need to know that they've got somebody in Washington who understands what's going on and will be right there to support them. I understand that to keep my family safe and your family safe, that it means keeping our country safe, and I will do everything that's needed to win the war on terror and to win in Iraq, because those are the only options that our country has to stay safe. Thank you so much.
I want to thank both of you for participating in this debate. Really, this is what democracy is all about. And I also want to thank our fine, fine group of panelists.
Absolutely, and we hope you at home are more informed about these candidates and where they stand on the very important issues we talked about.
And please make sure to join us on election night on KTWU. We will have live national coverage of all the races in the presidential race as well.
And on 27 News, we'll have the latest results of the Kansas races, live interviews with the winners and the losers, and political analysis from our good friend, Dr. Bob Beatty here.
And thank you all for watching.
And make sure to cast your ballot on November 2nd.
Thank you so much.
I know she'll be proud of me, that her father served.
The rain did come down hard and fast, causing floods.
The Sunflower Games give ordinary people the